success, governance and growth in Asia's digital gaming economies.
I'm very happy and honored to be moderating this panel with our three distinguished panel members. But of course, this is a very important topic that we need to be discussing because across Asia, digital gaming is evolving far beyond entertainment, right? And I think everyone can agree to that. It is becoming a powerful economic force, driving investment, innovation, digital transformation, employment. Very important. Employment and even tourism. And as the sector grows, governments and industry leaders face an increasingly important question. How do we create environments that encourage innovation and investment at the same time? Now, again, I'm delighted to be joined by three distinguished panel members. I'm going to give them a few moments as well to introduce themselves. Please start. Mark?
Dr. Mark Anthony King. Hello, hello. It's a pleasure to be here. I am a government consultant focused on good governance, mental health infrastructures, frameworks. I work with different presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, and different governments. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'll kick it off to my fellow panelists here.
Hi, I'm Govt Bartolome, and I've been an entrepreneur for 36 years. I specialize on business development, creating brands, both local and global. I'm based in Los Angeles, California, but I do a lot of business in the Philippines. So I specialize more in franchising. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Catherine Jalandoni, founder and president of Global AI Council Philippines, where we champion ethical AI adoption and integration in the Philippines. I've also previously executive director of the Institute of Corporate Directors, where we champion corporate governance, basing it on the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from each of you today, but I want to start with Mark. Mark, you're familiar with the Philippines and other Asian markets, jurisdictions. What are key regulatory models across Asia that are successfully attracting investments that you are seeing?
So I really prepared for this, as you can tell by my iPad here. So the most successful regulatory models understand one principle, and that's that investment generally tends to follow certainty. It doesn't follow low taxes, it doesn't follow little or loose regulation, government incentives. It follows certainty, right? Because trust is a legitimate form of currency, and people tend to not really focus on that. So investors are willing to operate within strict standards generally if those standards are clear, if those standards happen to be transparent and, you know, can be pretty consistently expressed. I believe that the future belongs to governments that aren't necessarily trying to be controlling, aren't trying to be gatekeepers, and really operate like system architects versus those controlling gatekeepers. So the goal is to create a framework where innovation, consumer protection, economic growth, and what I said earlier, you know, the greatest form of currency, public trust, all of these things can actually coexist harmoniously, because we just have to address the elephant in the room. This is an environment where corruption often runs rampant. So trust is critically important.
I mean, I think you really mentioned a great point there. But Butch, I want to go with you from an investor and business perspective. What gives, you know, business owners, operators, investors confidence in a particular market, and maybe based on what Mark also mentioned about trust and the regulatory framework that a government can bring into. So for the business people, we have, of course, our C-levels here, operators. What can you say about that?
Basically, we always call it, like in franchising, which I specialize on, we call it the co-branding.
Okay.
And in terms of co-branding, when you talk about the government and the private sector, I always see a big synergy whenever there's a cooperation between the two. Because, you know, the private sector cannot function without the government. And if they cannot agree, then there's no point. I mean, the investors will shy away. So I always say, whenever I see there's a big cooperation, whenever I always see the success behind and the benefit to the community. So that's very important.
I like that you mentioned that the private sector cannot function without the government, and vice versa. The government cannot function without the private sector as well. I want to go to Catherine, and I want to pick your brain on how technology, you know, will play into that role. How can regulators ensure that frameworks remain flexible enough? Because we know that technology is ever-changing, you know? So how can regulators support the industry, business people, and at the same time support innovation?
Thank you for the question. Actually, it's interesting right now. For the past couple of years, our regulators are actually very much self-aware that they are not the experts.
Yeah.
So for the past few years, there was really an effort to get resource speakers, get talents, work together with the private sector in not just discussing how the technologies are working or updating themselves, but in actually understanding how to create policies and regulations. It's taking time, yes, it's true. It's taking a few sessions actually to determine certain things, but the amount of sessions were called as resource speakers to different aspects where technology is relevant. Fake news, developing the regulations, creating who's accountable. The amount of topics that are being discussed simultaneously is very interesting and shows really how public sector is in fact trying to work together with private sector, informing these things, in creating regulations that are not too stringent as to stifle the technology, but still be enough to have that currency of trust that Mark was talking about, and that's very, very important. The framework that is actually quite exciting right now with our ASEAN chairmanship is the upcoming or the deliberations on the DEFA. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's Digital Economics Framework Agreement that is set to be signed within this ASEAN chairmanship year in November in the Philippines. That's going to be very interesting, and that will unlock really working together ASEAN nations in order to really uplift every nation here in ASEAN and make us stronger.
All right, I like that we are discussing what we call PPP, right? The public-private partnerships. Now, Butch, I want to continue with you on this because digital gaming economies are expanding. What role should public-private partnerships, PPP, play in shaping sustainable industry growth?
You know, this is something very ticklish for the last few years. If this is not well governed, you know, it can go haywire. Everything can go haywire. I mean, the purpose is clear, but the way it's being implemented is not done properly. Like, for example, I always believe in educating the public, changing mindset. Because when people think about online gaming, they always think it's something bad. But again, if you think about it, there's something like an economic indicator. Why do people go for it? Is it convenience? Is it something that they want to say, quote and unquote, try their luck? But how do you prevent, especially the minors, from getting into it? Because even if you say this is for adults only, the curiosity of the young people will still be there. I mean, it's normal. We all underwent this stage. Curiosity kills the cat, as they say. But, you know, this is how, like for example, I've seen a lot in other states, like in the US, where anything online for adults are shown actually in the middle of the night, not during prime time. So I guess it's good in such a way, but it has to be definitely well thought of.
All right. Now, Mark, where do governments typically get these partnership right? Where do they often struggle as well? So we're still talking about the public-private partnership. So based on your experience, you're familiar with the Philippines, the US, you mentioned also some other Southeast Asian countries in our discussion earlier. So where do you think governments getting it right and where are they struggling? Tough question, I know, but I'm sorry to put you on the spot there.
Are you really though? Tough but good question. So, you know, industries scale in a very unique way. I think that government generally understands public interest, or at least they think they do. If they did, I wouldn't have a job, right? But I believe that like industries understand innovation, industries understand growth, and industries understand the future, not necessarily profitability, but kind of that balance between profitability and creative expression. That's what drives innovation. It's not always profit-driven. But education, like you've been mentioning, understands how to recognize talent, right? So societies recognize what human impact is, and I want to say that the mistake that a lot of nations make and a lot of governments make is that they want to operate privately and they want to operate independently. I use the term gatekeeper, and I think that's fundamentally wrong. It doesn't lead to the kind of growth that we want, right? Because there's a difference between growth that we want versus growth that we need. And I think that we need to really focus on the kind of growth that is needed by society, not the kind of growth that is often wanted by certain industries or certain entities. So industries, they can provide investment. Universities can give us access to pipelines. But community organizations can address social concerns before they become like major societal issues. This is like my way of saying that the strongest ecosystems aren't built by being gatekeepers, aren't built by necessarily having more regulation. You know, we mentioned the necessity to protect youth, the necessity to have these systems in place. I think that we need to look at things in a more collaborative framework and in a framework of, I always take everything back to ethical leadership, right? I don't push faith or religion onto anybody, but I use Jesus as my model. So I take things back, whether I'm talking about youth development or whether I'm helping Ukraine rewrite their new constitution, which I am, the James 2:8 principle, you know. I look at things from the framework of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think if you look at life from the framework of if you're in a position of impact, authority, or leadership, from the position of if the shoe was on the other foot and what I'm trying to implement is going to directly affect my family, my loved ones, my wife, my mother, versus other people's, I think that we would move a little bit differently, and I think that the way that we approach business would be drastically different. Mm-hmm. You know, we need to recognize that long-term prosperity isn't necessarily the target.
Okay.
It's a blessing, but it's also a shared responsibility that society has with government and with the innovation system.
Right, and now you've mentioned government and the industry. I want to ask Catherine, how can technology gel the two sectors together? Do you have like a specific example, maybe here in the Philippines? How are you seeing government and the private sector and the technology in the middle?
So technology is very important when used properly. Okay. Actually, I'd like to jump off from what Mark said.
Please, yes.
There's more things that we need to do than we have time to do it for or bandwidth to do it for. So maybe I can create examples out of just two concrete examples of things that are being done.
Okay.
I always like to look at what's being done because there's always another room to talk about what needs to be done.
That's true.
So like for example, government, in my mind, it enables and it curtails. And that's their responsibility. When I say it enables, with what Mark said, you always need government because there are things private sector just cannot do. Like for example, connectivity, the infrastructure, that government has to provide as rights of the people. And they're actually doing that. They're working together with private sector and trying to see how they can connect the 7,000 over islands of ours so that the technology becomes an inclusive solution to more Filipinos, right? It curtails. Why? Because it has to be governed. So technology, the same technology that we use to solve things is also the same technology that people use to abuse things. Fake news, fraud, scams. That is also part of the responsibility that government has to make sure it protects its citizens from. And it is doing that by working again with the private sector on how to understand how to regulate, but at the same time not infringe. But that's not that easy as well. Same as when private sector knows that they need government. Government needs compliance at a certain level from the private sector, right? One of the things that is very difficult when you're trying to protect citizens from technology is if the technology, which today's technology allows, functioning within a country wherein you're not actually registered at. How now can government mandate accountability when they in fact cannot go after anyone within their jurisdiction? So when you're talking about technology, regardless of how fast it is, what's next after AI, there's already what's next after AI actually, blockchain, all of that really is something that ties solutions together. So it's not its own thing. It is a pillar. What you need, what the private sector does, what the government does, and the technology that ties and enables it. But that technology can also be used to break it apart. So that's why private-public partnership is very important, and it has to be a constant conversation. We see something happening, starting, handshake, signed, then the conversations stop. The audits stop. The governance break up. That's where we need to continue and strengthen what we're currently doing. End-to-end governance, understanding accountability, being transparent with the whole process.
You want to add to that,
Yeah,
Butch? Of course, please.
Is my mic working? Okay. I think we just have to add another segment to the public-private sector. And this is the education, the schools. Because no doubt, where will people be coming from? I mean, the people coming from are from the universities, from the schools. So if we don't touch that item, then where is the link? I mean, the link is broken. So you may have a very good aggressive compliance, private sector investing, but you don't have the schools that have really set their mind, educating them on the proper use, like what Kat was saying, the AI, anything technology must be, preceded with caution. So I think with this sector, everybody would always miss this education sector. So I would always say P, private, public, education sector, PPE.
Wow, I like that now we're creating a new term from PPP, the public-private partnership. It should be, as Butch mentioned, should be PPEP, the public-private education partnerships. Really makes sense, right? Now, well, I'm afraid that we're really running out of time, but final words from each of you about, this governance, the regulatory, and really making sure that the industry is also growing alongside the regulatory frameworks. Mark, I'll start with you.
Technology is doing what technology has always done, in essence. It's looking at humanity and it's amplifying our strengths, but it's also amplifying our weaknesses at the same time. And that's sometimes dangerous because we're generally ignorant to our own shortcomings and flaws as human beings. So as people, we're building brilliant systems at the same time, but because of the advent of AI and because we're not being taught how to use it the right way, we're losing creativity and critical thinking in the demographic that's going to be leading our future. And that's sometimes scary. AI can do things like detect fraud, protect your identity, identify early problems in the gaming industry, behaviors, enhance consumer protection, like valid things, but blockchain can improve transparency, auditability, and build trust, like I said earlier. But technology itself, just because it can do good things, isn't inherently a virtuous thing. It's not inherently good. Technology really magnifies human intent. It's like money. So I say that a wise society doesn't just ask, what can we build, or how far can we take this, but it asks, should we build this, and how far should we take this? I take things back to the James Dewey principle. We have to look at not just short-term profitability, but what do our decisions, what do the things that we build and that we scale, and what does the legacy that we leave behind, what kind of world does that create? Because we get so focused on, leaving a better world for the planet, but why don't we leave better people for the planet? But let's make sure that we focus on actually cultivating that demographic and teaching them how to be ethical, how to be honorable, how to not fall victim to this thing called AI and technology, but how to use it to become better, not become codependent and lose their identity and their creativity. So I would say know what it is that you're using and set the future up in a way that humanity can prosper beyond your generation. We need to think
very important,
intergenerationally and into the future.
Yes, and as a mother, I agree. Butch?
I always go by the 3 pillars that I go with. And I always say systems. If you don't have systems, forget it. Systems build trust. Whatever business you have, whether you're a nano-entrepreneur, you're starting a business, you always have to have a system. I mean, you're like building a condominium where, unfortunately, we had a very classic case in Pampanga, So, again, it did not have the trust. The second is actually, I always say, people are assets. People are assets. Because everywhere we go, we have talents. I mean, the Filipinos are all over the world. You go to Macau, you go to Las Vegas, as Mark was saying, everywhere you go, Filipinos are everywhere. We have a good, probably, talent, the EQ, the work ethics, right? And we need to develop them. Except, where do they learn? Is there an academy for people to learn about this business? None. And yet, like, for example, the country, for example, the Philippines is a model, but done right. And again, without any corruption, we can do it. We can achieve it. And that's my message to everybody here in this room.
I have the same wish. I have the same wish. Catherine, please.
So, I'd like to jump up from what Butch says. Education is very important. And probably that's one of the reasons why, for us in chairmanship this year, we are looking at AI for MSMEs, because that's exactly what we want to do. We want to educate our MSMEs, our entrepreneurs as well. But if I may, my last minute here, I want to tie it back to the topic at hand, governance and growth in Asia's digital gaming. And I want to implore something. Gamification is the easiest and best way and most addicting way to be educated. Okay? So I implore, practice governance in developing your games, in executing your games, in launching, and actually allowing people to use your platforms. And in that, at least we can guarantee on a certain level that we are going to grow the digital economy in gaming here in the Philippines as well as in ASEAN, but also that we grow it with educating people, with including, because technology is useless unless it's intuitive, honestly. It is not an inclusive thing if it is not intuitive. So I'm hoping that your platforms will be intuitive enough for people so that they understand and they learn from it. And of course, they enjoy from it. Thank you.
All right, our team have been very generous and provided me more time to add one more question. And well, the question will go to all of you. If you could implement one policy or industry initiative, because it's really important we cite examples as well, because we can always talk about theories, we can always talk about ideas, but let's be straightforward now. If you can, if you could implement one policy or industry initiative today to accelerate responsible growth in the Philippines and in Asia's digital gaming economies, what would it be? Okay, I'll start with Mark. I would want to say I'll start with ladies first, but Mark, we'll give time more for Catherine.
Thank you. That's a really good question. I feel like I'm speaking on repeat here. I always take everything back to 3 words: honor, ethics, and integrity. So I'm going to tell a very, very brief story. A lot of the work that I do is also in combating human trafficking, specifically child trafficking.
Very
And
nice initiative.
I've had the privilege of, back in the U.S., helping to abolish child marriage laws in 16 out of the 50 U.S. states. So what I've learned is that there are systems and there are intentional loopholes that are placed strategically where people don't see, that allow bad things to happen, that allow corruption, and that allow violations of human rights to prosper and expand with reckless abandon. So I think creating a system of honor, ethics, and integrity, we have to take it back to education, because it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. But when you educate the youth on the importance of these, not just principles, but these virtues, that you have a moral, ethical, and celestial obligation to put yourself in a position of power and of authority to make your community, make your country, and the world a better place. So we have to ensure that we stop looking at profitability as the sole driving factor behind what we do, but what is our legacy? Because at the end of the day, we all have to answer to some force when we leave, right? So I would say hyper-criminalize and severely punish any actions that make people's lives worse and that infringe on people's rights, or that in any way, shape, or form prey on people's addictions, prey on people's ignorance. We have to do that because as a society, we move in a better direction. And I will say, not necessarily hyperfixate on efficiency. I know that efficiency is important, but efficiency, when it's lacking ethics, discernment, and wisdom, creates a perfect storm where corruption, where exploitive systems, and where dangerous ideologies can spread indiscriminately.
All right,
that's my take.
That's a bold policy pitch. Butch, if you can pitch to Philippine Congress right now, what policy could that be?
You know, I always like to start small, dream big. And starting small is like planting a seed. And the seed that I like to start, really, to convince the government, is to really reinforce, revisit our educational system. You know, we have too much K-12, too much all this education, all the PhDs. But where is the implementation? Where is the result? I always clamor for results, the change. And the year 2026 is the way we should have the change. And where do I start? I'll start with the education. I'll start to convince the teachers. I'll start to convince the Department of Education. Let's come up with an academic curriculum.
Yeah.
I used to be a teacher. That's why I know how it feels when you see your students growing up in the wrong way. The values, that's what Mark was saying. So I always say, come on guys, wake up. Let's not be traditional. It's already 2026.
Yeah.
The digitalization, the technology is here. And yet we're still aiming for the primitive way. So I guess education, let's go for it. Let's do it.
Revisit education. Catherine, is there anything in particular that Global AI Council Philippines is pushing for our regulators to look at?
But particularly, we, of course, ethical AI, right? And inclusivity, and actually doing it fast. What we're trying to do is to enable as fast as possible, because we want the Filipinos to not end up as users. You know, we are an asset class. We have always been the support system globally. We want to enable the Filipinos, and it ties in with the regulations, with the support, the technologies, and the education. We want the Filipinos to be the architects, to create platforms, to create these programs, not just use them. So that's what we want to do as fast as possible.
No, and that's really a great point, because when the industry look at the Philippines, they're seeing, it's a country of big users, player numbers, but the industry also needs to know, and I guess the whole world needs to know, that actually the Philippines is also a country of developers. And we need to support them as well. Now, thank you, Mark, Butch, and Catherine, for your valuable insights today. Okay, our discussion has shown that the future of Asia's digital gaming economies will depend not only on innovation and investment, but also strong governance and responsible growth. Thank you. Thank you.
Jenny, I've got a bit of a surprise for you guys. I'm going to actually ask you to stay on stage because we've got a little bit more time opportunity, which means I'm going to ask if there's any questions from the floor. We've got a lovely lady here with a microphone. Does anybody on the floor, we don't often have time for questions, but is there anybody here? We've had a deeply philosophical panel discussion. Is there any questions from the floor? Anybody got a question? Can we take people at random and put them on the spot, says Dr. Mark? I guess so. Is there someone you're thinking of specifically?
Wow. Hello. Hi, I'm Justine Tabile from Business World, a reporter from Business World. So I'm just wondering, for our panelists, how do you think the government could balance regulation and innovation in terms of applying high technology such as artificial intelligence?
Well, thank you for that particular question. What's interesting there is there's so much studies, there's so much statistics, not just, and you know, the current technology you're referring to, I'm assuming, is more AI related, right? Gone are the days that if you don't talk to anyone, you're okay. No, this technology requires us to actually speak with our neighboring countries. It is we talk a lot about before about open finance, interoperability, and it's very interesting because the technology really cannot be curtailed country per country, right? So actually, one of the things that I was going to say, had that question continued to me on what regulation. I will leave Butch with education. I think we have enough champion on him as it is. Okay? But the technology is so fast. There's no way to curtail what it is. And unfortunately, you know what? I'll put the elephant back in the room. This technology was released to the world unregulated. Right? It was. It's out there. Whoever wants to do it for bad can use it, can architect it. So we have this particular pressure to come up with a way not just to regulate it, but hopefully to build it, because it grows. We're talking about generative AI, you know, we're talking about the technology that can teach itself. So we need to catch up very, very, very fast. And so in my mind, what I really want is I'm hoping that there's a way that it doesn't become a Philippine law, a US law, a Europe law, but if there is a way to really help have a global regulation to certain of course, limit it, put standards there, technologies, so that they're accountable globally. Not just on a specific country, because if it does harm in one country, believe me, it's going to do harm in the rest as well.
I was going to say, you have NATO, you have the World Health Organization, you have the United Nations. So this is the technology, like you said, that was released just unrestricted to every part of the world, and it was created primarily for military applications, and we just gave it to everybody. And I think that's grossly negligent. So in terms of, to answer your question, in terms of what the government can do, I think that it would be phenomenal if, just like in COVID, we all got on the same page and stayed indoors, whether we agreed with it or not. As a species, we agreed that this is what we're all going to do for the time being. I think that we should apply that same philosophy to something like AI, because the data is out there. Yes, there are inherent values to utilizing AI in terms of shaving time off of your day. It doesn't get better. But at the same time, you know, how many people, you can do a show of hands or you can raise your hand inside your head, have you ever asked AI, hey, can you write this in my voice? Can you write this like me? You're deferring to an external thing to think like you and to create something with your voice. It's causing an identity crisis in Gen Z. I don't even want to think about the damage it's going to cause in Gen Alpha in terms of their reliability and dependence on this, not for working like millennials and Gen X, but for determining the question that humanity's been asking since the beginning of time: who am I? We don't want to outsource that to a program. So I think us getting on the same page as a species and saying, all right, this is what the technology is, and this is how we can use it, and these are the barriers that we're going to put in place for the common people and then for military. And I think that there have to be layers and levels to something as potentially catastrophic for humanity as artificial intelligence. You know, we regulate so many things that are far less dangerous. Why not this thing?
Yeah. All right.
My take on this is that, you know, it became a free-for-all. Everybody seems to be grabbing one for each other. You know, what's convenient for me may not be convenient to Mark or to Kat, okay? But the thing is, what's in it for everyone? So every country may regulate it, but again, as Mark is saying, if we have something like a common ethics, a common goal, where developers adhere to it, where developers are verified. You know, a lot of people become AI creators, but if they stick to a code of ethics, they know that a verified one should be followed. Unverified, forget it, trash it. So that's the only way. Or else it will be chaotic. I mean, we may not have a lot of missiles, but what is creating now is this AI is creating their own missiles towards each other. And that's something else.
All right, thank you. I hope that answers your question. We do have another one. But, I'm so sorry we can't get another one. Maybe in the next panel. Again, Mark, Butch, and Catherine, thank you so much. Please give them a round of applause.
Absolutely. I have to say, Jenny, wasn't that amazing? That very philosophical panel discussion. And thank you for sticking with us for some extra time.